Eccoci qua a 5 minuti con Dony Mac Manus. Dony Mac Manus is the founder of the Sacred Art School Firenze, and the first question is very simple. How did you came in your mind this idea of a Sacred Art School?
Well, the Sacred Art School came about really through a series of experiments. I trained in the New York Academy of Art from 1999 to 2001, where I learned how to really study anatomy as an artistic language, essentially. I left New York for Italy, where I worked for a year and a half in Rome and a year and a half in Florence. Continued to work on commissions for the United States, large bronzes. And then I encountered these other schools in Florence while I was here, and I discovered that there were different ways of approaching artistic training. But they were teaching these private schools were teaching academic art on quite an interesting level in certain schools, where they're teaching anatomy, drawing, painting, sculpture, in quite an advanced level. So these would be the private art academies, these mostly American, Canadian. These schools were doing a good job in this area, but the frustration that the students had from these schools was that they weren't connecting with their contemporary culture. And the other group of students that I encountered while I was in Florence were really students from the art schools, the modern art schools. Their frustration was different in that they were only getting a certain amount of formation, a very little amount of formation, and they were frustrated they didn't have a language in order to communicate with. So there were two different problems. One group of students essentially had the formation, a certain amount of artistic formation, the other had no artistic formation. And in order to resolve the problems of both parties, I thought the best way was to have a school that would teach the artistic language, and through the artistic language encourage the students to penetrate deeper into the culture and to find the thought from which that language comes from. Because as we know, all thought comes from language, and if we are to really understand the language, we need to penetrate that thought. And essentially, the only way I saw of doing that was really to establish a sacred art school, because only in a sacred art school can you teach an artistic language with the thought, so as to go really deep into exactly what that culture comes from. The reason I say that is because if we look across the board throughout history, it's always been sacred art that has been the greatest concentration of any particular culture, whether it be Aztec culture, Roman culture, Greek culture, Egyptian culture. We know that sacred art has been the most concentrated element of that culture. Now, what I dream to do with the school is to reboot, to reignite the culture that we're in. And that is based on Christianity. And that Christianity is based on Greco-Roman, Judeo-Christian culture. So what I propose to do with the school is to teach the artistic language in the context of the Greco-Roman Judeo culture, so as to teach the language and penetrate the culture through the language.
If we are going to talk about the foundation of the school, let's say that the 3 or 4 pillars on which the school is based, what could you tell about this?
Well, I suppose leading from what I was just saying, essentially these 4 pillars of our culture are really the foundation of where we're coming from. Now, what I would like to do is help to use this training so as to fully penetrate the culture to the extent that it actually is, it can teach the culture in its depth. So in other words, if we teach the culture in its deepest level, not just the language but the thought that's behind it, then there's a real concentration of formation, which will, like a drop of ink in a glass of water, penetrate every element of the creative life of that artist. So that's the approach I would take. Now, the pillars, as you might call, of this thought and this teaching, really, the ideas are really stemmed from, well, the initial idea stemmed from John Paul II's letter to artists in 1999. And this was what inspired me to go to New York in 1999. And while I was in New York, in the academy, I discovered theology of the body. And the theology of the body became a transformational experience for me in my personal life, in my interior life, my spiritual life, and my artistic life. To the extent that it transformed my work and transformed my relationships. And this also helped the students in the school, in the New York Academy. I decided to set up a workshop in the academy every Friday night to invite other students, and those other students came to my studio. It filled my studio every Friday night from 8 to about 3 o'clock in the morning, discussing theology of body. And this is also overspilled into the bars of Tribeca. So this was a very interesting experience, and I knew that would be very foundational in the school. The third document that's very important is really The Spirit of the Liturgy by Pope Benedict, when he was Cardinal Ratzinger in 2000. And this really gives a very fine focus to the training, which is essentially to create liturgical art. Because if you manage to create liturgical art, then you have the real spiritual concentration and artistic concentration and refinement, which should penetrate everything that you do, like that ink drop, as I mentioned earlier on. The fourth would be really Real Presences by George Steiner, a Jewish philosopher who writes about this whole concept of real presence. And that's a very broad concept, but it's fundamental to the school in that all artists are striving for real presence. They want to create real presence in their work, because it's only within real presence that we can actually communicate real thought.
Why it's so important, theology of the body? I know that in your class you are teaching artistic anatomy, and so students are exposed to 3-hour classes with a model, and you bring into that class also a bit of theology of the body. So why is that so important, and how the students react to this proposal?
Well, this all came from my experience, a combined experience of over the years. I was asked to return to Ireland in 2003 to start a school there, the Irish Academy of Figurative Art, which I founded and directed for about 3.5 years. And during that period I discovered that what I tried to do is basically teach technique, academic artistic technique, drawing, painting, sculpture, and artistic anatomy, and hoping that the beauty that would be created in the works would lead the students to a deeper penetration of who they are and what culture is. In other words, discover truth through beauty. Very few artists were prepared to go the full distance with that type of training, so I decided that the best way to do this would be to create a sacred art school in order that I can concentrate on this mode of communication, so as to actually use the artistic language in the context of his thought. So I designed a program of artistic training, mainly in drawing, because drawing is the basis of everything. I felt that if I could teach drawing in the context, as a language, in the context of artistic anatomy, as a refined vocabulary of drawing, this is life drawing obviously, then, and also in the context of a very clear understanding of the human body and the human condition. And that's why I teach theology of the body as a very clear philosophy and theology of what it means to be a human being, in the context of artistic anatomy as a very clear vocabulary, artistic vocabulary, and using both the clarity of idea and clarity of artistic language to use both of these in the context of a full penetration of the meaning of what it means to be a human being in a contemplative environment where we are offered the body before us as an image, as a presence which we can dialogue with as another person, as artists dialoguing with the model as another person. So this is just to encourage the students to see the model as a person, so as to realize the real presence of that person on the page.
We had an interview with Father Bernardo Strada, and he told us that, according to him, a very important icon for contemporary world is the Sacred Family. I know that you are you did a lot of statue about Saint Joseph and the child, but also that you are interested in the Sacred Family. So maybe if you want to add something about these topics, it would be very, very nice.
Well, yeah, I mean, Holy Family has always been very close to my heart. I've done a number of St. Joseph's with the Child Jesus, life-size bronzes in the United States mainly, because I saw it as a way of addressing contemporary issues, for instance, in particular the crisis of paternity, which I witnessed firsthand in my work in inner city Dublin and Belfast and the Bronx in New York City, working with inner city programs to help kids. I've noticed that most of the issues that these kids suffer from is a lack of a paternal figure. So this is something I wanted to address in the figure of St. Joseph, for instance, so as to encourage, so as to portray a young St. Joseph, also inspired by St. Josemaria Escrivá, founder of Opus Dei. I wanted to produce an image of St. Joseph as a young man, which is kind of a modern, it's an original idea. Usually he's portrayed as an old man. I wanted to portray Joseph as a young man, which he was mostly likely was a young man, so as to encourage young men to look after their children, essentially. So I have Joseph holding the child Jesus in his arms and compassionately kissing the child, showing that it's okay to be young and virile, but also look after your child, which is a very important message, I felt.
There is a lot of tenderness in this embrace between Saint Joseph and...
Well, it's funny you mention that word, because tenderness is the word that's always used when people are talking about my work, and that's something that...
And it is not easy to portray tenderness. It's very... I mean, it could be very cheesy, but it's not easy to give an image, a powerful image of tenderness.
It's very funny you mention that, because that's exactly what it is. It is a very dangerous area. It's so easy to be cheesy, and it's very good that you mentioned that, because that's exactly. I think that's the greatest achievement probably to date, is to create a tender image that's not cheesy. Thank you.